Hello, my name is Victor Kinzer, and this is the second part of my two-part screencast series on the different ways that you can use award in the Qualicodea system. In my first video, I talked about single node utilization, where you put the entire information and all the actions for a full competitive segment. So a competitive segment would include all of the periods of funding in a funding proposal if it is awarded, and my first video covered putting all of that into a single award node. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit on how to use award hierarchy, but not in the way that it's most commonly used. There's decent documentation out there on using award hierarchy to differentiate between accounts. And another way that you can use award hierarchy is to differentiate between specific funding actions. So you get kind of a whole project view at a high level. In the hierarchy, it's a little bit easier to navigate. You have to use the system a little bit differently, but I sort of want to demonstrate that structure. So I have part of a hierarchy set up already. We're in award search here in the Qualicodea system. So we're going to search for my award. The department is BL-IIDC, and we're going to go ahead and search. And here you can see I have a few nodes set up, and I have a few actions in here. They're similar to the actions from the first video. The only thing from the first video I'm not going to go over here is a supplement, but I'm going to sort of go through some other steps so you can see what a normal increment setup would look like. So here you see there are these numbers. The first six numbers in these award IDs are the same, and then the last 5 are different. We're going to go ahead and go into this 00001 award, and here you see the last action taken here was investigator change. That's similar to what you saw in the single node situation, but things are a little bit different here. So we're going to go ahead and go over to award actions. And here we have hierarchy actions. We're going to open this up and expand this, and you can see here that we have multiple award nodes. Again, you can see these numbers from the award search. So this top one is the parent node. When you create a brand new award, just a fresh award, you have the very top of the hierarchy. It will always be the top of the hierarchy. What I've seen most schools do, although certainly not all, is that top node doesn't necessarily hold obligated funding. It doesn't hold your documents, your attachments, and whatnot. It just sort of serves as a file folder in which all of the later award documents, or award nodes as they're often called, can reside within. It's the glue that holds the whole project together. So you'll remember from the last video that we ended up with a change of PI sort of midstream in the project. So before, you had to go into award history or the time and money history, and it was a little bit difficult to tell exactly when that had happened without, some investigation. But here, it'd be a little easier if I close this up. You can see that the PI displays for all of these. So we can see that this first year of funding, Inez Chu was the PI, and then it moved to Alice and Kate. So that kind of gives you a very immediate overview. Now if we open this up, we can see the anticipated amount, the obligated amount, we can see the obligation start and end date, and the project start and end date for this particular node. Then we can very quickly jump down here and look at that information here. The one downside to this view, and this is a bug that hasn't been fixed yet, you'll remember that I set this up so that we could have direct and indirect anticipated and obligated transaction amounts. I have done that here as well. Unfortunately, that breakdown does not display in the hierarchy actions. All you see is the total. But if we go back to the award tab, and we are in that top node, if you look up here at award ID, that 001, you can come down here and you can see that we do have that direct and indirect breakdown. And all of that money is displaying. Now, this is displaying the total money for the whole hierarchy. So you can still come here to this top node and get that total monetary package for the entire project. You don't lose that by breaking this up into individual nodes. And we'll talk a little bit about how the system does that and handles it, and hopefully it will become apparent when I, perform my next funding action, what that looks like. So we are going to come and jump in and view history for this top node. So you can see we do still have access to this view. It just doesn't hold every single action for the entire project. This holds the history actions for this particular award node, in this case, the parent level, the highest level node. And you'll see I have new, and then when I did an investigator change, I did version this award so that it displayed the current investigator. But we can still look back at those previous years and see who the investigator was in a very easy format. And you'll see, from the most convenient way to handle hierarchy and expanding it as new funding comes in, it really is helpful to go up and change that at that parent sort of file folder level. So we're going to go ahead and close that and come back to our award. So we're going to go through the motions of if we got the third year of funding. So we will go to Award Actions and go to Hierarchy Actions, expand this out. So we want to go to this parent, and we want a new child node. So we'll go to New Child. We don't want it to be new. If we select New and I press Create, I'll get a blank node, and I'll have to enter in all my information manually. It's not really ideal. Some people might prefer to do that and just pull in everything fresh from a fresh sponsor template, or the information that will link from the IP when we link that. But personally, I prefer to copy information from the parent, because then if anything has happened, any corrections, any updates, any administrative actions that I didn't route and create a full IP for, I'll get that information. Those changes will automatically be brought into the new year, which I find beneficial. So we're going to copy from the parent. This will copy from the node that we are currently in. Depending on how detailed your school is, you might need to have multiple levels. So we could go down here, and if I do copy from parent, now we'll copy from this child, this 002, and create a third level, a grandchild level, just so you know what this interface is really doing. But in our case, we want to copy from that highest level to create a new year on the same level with these two. So New Child from the 00001, copy from parent, and we will click Create. And now we have our new award node. If we look up here, we see this ends with 4, but it has the same core number, so we're in the same family. And we're going to do enter third year increment. So now we come down here. It did copy the transaction type. We don't really want that. So we'll go and do allotment increment. Actually, I just realized it did not copy the transaction type. You'll notice that before we had the transaction type of investigator change, there's a parameter in the system where you can default the transaction type whenever you copy an award node. That can be set by institution, but it's not dynamic once you set it. You set it to a particular value and it will default to that. It indicates here in the transactions that this was a copied award. We want to change this to year 3 of 5. So we come down here, we're going to check this information, research, grant, lead unit is correct, we will want it to be active, and now we can enter a new modification ID. So the first year didn't have a modification ID because it was initial funding, the second year had 001, and then the change of PI had 002, so this transaction is going to be 003, and that's how you can keep track of what the different transactions are and separate that from the actual sponsor award ID or grant number. So you can see here I cannot edit this information at all, and that is because I'm now in a hierarchy. If you compare this to the single node option from my previous video, we had the option to come in here and just enter in our monetary changes here, but because of the complexity of hierarchy, there really isn't a good way to do that. So that option is turned off. We will have to use time and money. So we'll come back up here, and we want to be sure to include our funding proposal. Now, something I do want to show here, this still says initial funding. If I pull in a proposal right now, it's going to copy all the information from that proposal. Because I copied from the award, I don't really want it to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save. As soon as I've executed a save, my proposal merge types change to No Change, Merge, and Replace. If I select No Change, nothing will come in from the IP, but it will link it, so I know that it is the source of funding for this award. If I do Merge, it will add any personnel items, any credit split items that are not currently in this award. It will add them to this award. If I choose Replace, it will wipe out all of my personnel and credit split items and replace them with whatever is in the IP I am linking. One thing that I do want to emphasize is none of the other data, the cost share, the special review, will pull in unless it's that initial funding proposal. So these are very limited merges. And I did that because I inherited all that information when I copied from the parent node. And in this case, that's really where I wanted that information to come from. And there are a variety of reasons for that. The initial proposal may not have had all of the right IRB funding information. That could have been updated on the award. Depending on what your institution's policies are, they may not always go back and include that on the IP. They may want those funding sources to come from the actual award, or they may only want that on the IP. So all of these different options are here to accommodate whatever your institution's processes are, because the IRB office may have input on how they want things to display in protocol. So you do have some flexibility in how you handle that. But in this case, I'm going to go with No Change to keep it simple. So we'll go to Institutional Proposal. I'm just going to do an open search because there isn't much there. You can see I have these two IPs that are related to this. This revision was the change of PI. While I do have the new PI, this isn't the year that that change happened in. That happened back in year 2. So I'm going to go ahead and click Return Value. This is the original IP. It covered all 5 years. They were all budgeted in that proposal. So that's really what's funding this particular award node. And you'll see there are some other advantages to having a single IP that links each year that is funded that way. So we'll go ahead and click Add. So we added that with No Change, so nothing was pulled in. The advantage of that is if we had merged or replaced, we would have pulled in Inez Chu, which isn't ideal because Inez Chu is no longer the PI. But because we had previously done a PI change, that was reflected on the A node, so we did get that information and that came down through the award. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the No Change proposal merge. So now we'll come down here and just take a quick proof at everything. We have our right modification ID, sponsor award ID, the dates and the amounts will be updated when we do time and money. We will have gotten all the appropriate custom data and reports and everything else when we copied from the award. So we're going to go ahead and go directly to Award Actions and turn on data validation, just to be certain we haven't missed anything. We have one warning. I do want to show this just so you know it when the message appears. It says Allison Kate is not included and certified in a funding proposal. In this particular case, because we're not linking that that action where the PI changed, because we don't want to keep linking that every year, it doesn't show here that she's certified, but we know that that's on file, so that's why this is just a warning. So we will go ahead and submit this. Yes, the validation warnings exist, but that's fine. This might take a second. Okay, and now we're back in Hierarchy Actions, and we can expand this, and we can see that we have our new year. But there's no money in it yet. We still have zeros. So, and the dates don't quite line up properly. So this is the point where we will go into time and money. So we will go ahead, and you can see here the last action I took was a correction. As I was setting this up, I missed a step, so I went ahead and took a corrective action. So we'll go ahead and come down here and press Edit. And now we're doing an increment for year 3 of 5. We do have a little bit more to do here than when we had the single node. So you see this is year 1, this was year 2. We copied this from the parent, so this pulled down the dates from the parent, and that isn't really correct. So in this case, we want to do from year 17 to 2018 because that's appropriate for the next year of funding. This is where things get tricky. Each of these show the individual year, and depending on your school's processes, this may or may not be how you keep track of this, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm doing it this way. This parent node, the top node, represents the whole project. So we now need to take this out another year. Everything's here in one place. It's not difficult to keep track of, but it is an extra step that you have to remember to do and sort of proof on, and it's a little bit more involved than the single node option. So the other thing I want to show is, up here, this is just showing us totals right now. We want to go ahead and show distributed and distributable. So the way money is kept in the hierarchy is a little bit more complicated. All of the money from all of the various award nodes will roll up to the parent node. So you can see right here, this is the parent node. We have distributed obligated funds. So that means that $270,000 of obligated funds exist in this node's children or grandchildren or descendants. And 0 is distributable. So that means there's no real money that is obligated that lives in this node. And that's perfectly normal. When we come over here to anticipated, there's 270,000, which matches the obligated, which again is distributed. It is in the descendants of this particular award node, but it does not live in this node itself. However, it does add to the total. And distributable, there's still $405,000 of anticipated funds that are still living in this parent that we will get to distribute down to children as that money comes in, and it is actually distributed down to the node that represents that particular funding action. That's how we're organizing money in this particular case. The other thing you can do, I've gone through a setup where I'm keeping all the anticipated funds in the top node like this, and then as funding actions come in, I create a new node, I'm moving those anticipated funds down where they belong, and then adding obligated funds to match them. Or, as is the case with NIH, if the money that's committed reduces each year, it might not match them. You might not get quite as much obligated as you were originally anticipating, and this gives you a reporting point to compare what you originally anticipated to what you really got. And that might be a reporting item that individuals at your institution would find very useful. So if we go down to these award nodes, we can now see that they have 135,000 distributable, and right there in these two nodes, and this was year 1 and 2, and that accounts for this 270,000 in their parent that is distributed. Now the thing about this is it says distributable, that there's that implication we could move it further. If we had 3rd, 4th, 5th generation nodes, which some schools use very complicated hierarchy systems that do have multiple levels like that, then we could further distribute this money down. But in this case, we're not working in a structure like that. So we have now this new node we've set up with no money whatsoever. We've set up our dates. I've sort of explained how the money's arranged. So now we're going to go down to transactions. And we're going to go ahead and say that this transaction is for year 3 of 5. And we're going to start out by taking that anticipated funding from the parent node and moving it down into this new year. So the anticipated direct change will be $90,000, and the anticipated F&A or indirect change will be $45,000. It's important that you move the anticipated funds first, because obligated funds can never be more than anticipated funds. So now that that anticipated funding will be in our new node, we can take money from external, which means new funding has come in, and move that into that node. So in this case, we're not working on a situation where we've gotten less money than we expected. NSF is usually pretty consistent about giving us what they promise in that first year's award. So we've now added the 90,000 and the 45,000 of obligated funding. Of 5 obligated funding. So we can add that extra level of detail in the comments. One advantage of having pending nodes that are not active for out years, so you could set your whole hierarchy up and have a status of pending for the years that aren't funded yet, is it makes this a little bit simpler. When the obligated funds come in, you just add them and you're done. But that does mean that whenever you get a new, competing segment that you need to set up a new hierarchy for, there's a lot more upfront setup. So it's just a matter of, do you want more upfront setup or do you want more work when later years of funding come in? And that's really a decision for your institution, and it depends on how fine-grained you need your reporting to be, especially of out-year anticipated funding. So we've done all of this. These are both added, and we have transaction IDs here. It's important to remember to add these. You saw that there was the correction earlier. I had added a transaction and forgotten to press the add button. So it didn't actually register when I finalized my time and money document, and I had to go in and correct it. So we'll come down here, we'll press submit. And now our time and money document is completed, and we can go here and we can see that we now have our 135, our 90, our 45 in all 3 of these years. So now if we go to distributed and distributable, we can see that in the parent node, we have distributed now $405,000, and we only have $270,000 left that is distributable because we moved more of the funding down into that child node. It still adds up to the same amount for anticipated funding, but obligated funding has gone up. When we added those funds from external to year 3, they were added to this node as well. So you don't have to put money in the top and move it down. You can put money directly into child nodes, grandchild nodes if you have them, and it will automatically do all that math for you and keep track of this distributed and distributable amount. This is a very important dynamic to keep in mind if you do any data conversion into award. It's very easy to just see these totals. And you see these totals and you load in data, but if you don't keep track of the distributed and distributable amounts very well, and you set up awards that still have to be maintained and will still have future years that come in, you can end up with some bugs in time and money, and when you try to execute a transaction, the numbers aren't all what they really should be. And unless you dive into that level, you won't really be aware of that. So we're going to go up here and click Return to Award. So now you can see we're in our parent node. It took us back there, which is the default in a lot of cases. And we can see these amounts. And now we can go over to Award Actions and look at Hierarchy Actions. And we can see our hierarchy. That information is there. It still says Alice and Kate. And we have the amounts listed. Some of the advantages of this situation. So any final documents, any final agreements, final budgets, anything can be put in these individual nodes and tightly associated with that action. If you have a single node situation, you're going to have all of your attachments in the same award document, and you will have to then create very strict naming conventions, attachment type conventions to make sure you can navigate what could potentially become quite a few documents. If you have a couple no-cost extensions, a PI change, maybe a supplement or two during the life of a competing segment, any number of other administrative actions might come in. all of that's going to be in one place, and that can be difficult to track. It can also be difficult to track where exactly in the life of this did that change of PI happen, etc., etc. Whereas with this structure, that's much clearer. The other advantage, and I do want to jump over to Medusa now. So you can see here, go ahead and close that. You can see here that I can see all of the awards that are funded by this action. And so this is a view that, you know, a faculty member might come in and see in their protocol. You might have administrative staff who, you know, can come in and look at this. They tend to go into their institutional proposal documents. Maybe they don't want to get into award hierarchy, and they can go through here, look at any of these, and jump into the award immediately. It's really nice. The one thing to be aware of when you do this, because everything does sort of tie together with this institutional proposal, is if you have protocols and your institution allows one protocol to fund multiple grant projects, be that IACUC or IRB, that will link multiple hierarchies together in a single Medusa view. This view is very useful, especially once you start getting into negotiation and subawards, because you can see the particular years that a negotiation applies to, the particular actions, and the same with subawards, depending on how your institution sets up subawards. Some of them might create one subaward document to deal with full 5 years. You might attach that to the 0001. Or you might attach that down at the individual funding levels if you use subaward a little bit differently. And you can see all of that reflected directly in this Medusa view. You just want to be a little careful about how you link your protocols so you're aware of that. So that's kind of my overview of what this particular award hierarchy structure is useful for. If there are other award hierarchy structures that anyone would like demoed, you know, I would be willing to possibly look at putting together videos on those, but the ones that are really driven by accounting and are just about separating out accounts and seeing which actions apply to those accounts, several schools are already using those models. The process for that is a little more well established. So I really wanted to focus on this particular model for this demo. Thank you very much. I hope this has been useful, and please leave any feedback in the comments.